I'm Stephen Price.
Hello, I'm Cara Githens.
This is The Innkeepers, a podcast by Sanctuary Inn. At Sanctuary Inn, we believe we are called to equip, refresh, and restore God's global workers.
On this podcast, we will be interviewing guests who have much to teach us about the many facets of missionary care. Let's learn together and be encouraged to press on in the work God has given each one of us to do.
Hi, this is Steve.
Hello, this is Cara.
And we'd like to welcome you to another episode of the Innkeepers podcast.
Yes, welcome back. So today we are interviewing Dr. Mary Wilder again, and we get to talk with her about aging parents.
Yeah, so this is our second interview with Dr. Mary, and if you didn't hear the first one, I'd encourage you to find that, and where she talks about her life and ministry in Pakistan as a medical doctor. But in this episode, I asked her if we could take some time to talk about missionaries and aging parents, because she came off the mission field to care for her parents. And I know that's not an easy choice. It wasn't an easy choice at the time, and it can be a very hard choice.
Yeah, so we hope you enjoy this conversation and have a chance to hear a little bit more of Dr. Mary's story, too.
Well, today on the Innkeepers podcast, we have the opportunity for a second time to have a special interview, a special visit with Dr. Mary Wilder. And Cara, I know you had classes from Dr. Mary and got to know her at Western Seminary.
Yes,
and
I did.
I've had the opportunity for several years, like over 30 years, to know Dr. Mary at Montavilla Church in Portland. And so I know a little bit of her story, but she has written a book called Dust and Devotion. And in that book, she shares her life story, and it's well worth reading. And so we would encourage you, there'll be a link in this podcast, how you can get a hold of that book. Well, Dr. Mary, would like to welcome you to the podcast for the second time.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here. Well, a privilege depending on what you ask me and what I have to tell you.
Dr. Mary, could you share a little bit about your story and your background and in missions?
Well, my story is that I was born in California, lived there 16 years, came up here, junior in high school, graduated, went to Portland State College, went to University of Oregon Medical School, 5 years of postgraduate training at Providence. And then I went off to Pakistan as a medical missionary in the Shikarpur Christian Hospital in Shikarpur, Sindh province. Pakistan.
And you are not an only child. So tell us a little bit about your siblings. And
Well, I'm not an only child. No, I'm the fourth one out of 5. And the first 4 of us, Ruth, Lois, Paul, and Mary, were born in our parents' actually, I was their 11th wedding anniversary present.
oh, wow.
So, yes, I'm the most expensive present they ever got. And then 10 years after me came our baby sister, Esther.
Oh.
So we were 5, Ruth, Lois, Paul, Mary, and Esther. All preacher's kids. My father was a pastor.
I didn't realize that Esther was separated from the rest of you a bit.
Oh, well, she wasn't separated out. I tell you, Paul and I, he was 12, I was 10 when she was born. We were absolutely thrilled because we would go to church and play with all the kids there. And then their parents took them home. But now we had one that we could take home. And that girl, I don't think her feet touched the ground for the first 2 years because somebody was always carrying her
Right.
with her. And it was,
Yeah.
I helped to raise her, and that's why she's such a wonderful lady today.
Of course. No doubt about that.
No doubt. Mm-hmm.
So when you were preparing to go be a missionary doctor, as we just explored some of this in our last podcast with you. You thought you were going to go serve in Africa, but instead you ended up in Pakistan. What did your family think of all this, of you heading overseas and doing medical missions?
Well, my parents were very supportive and very pleased to think I was following God. My oldest sister, Ruth, and Al were missionaries for 25 years in Naples, Italy. And my sister Lois was married to a pastor. And so that I was going out to do something that I felt was God's will, that was fine. And I was going to be far away, but that was all right.
Sounds like they clearly raise children who understand the call of serving the Lord with their lives, and they were going to support you in whatever He called you to.
Yeah. That's right. And we had all these missionaries staying with us. My daddy wasted all this good preaching time on missionaries and had a missionary in the pulpit one Sunday every month. And so I knew lots of missionaries from all over. And that's how I knew that it was Africa.
Yeah.
Little did you know that there were other hot places in the world you could go.
Well, I'd heard of other places. I mean, we knew missionaries from all over, but it was Africa, yes. The Sudan part of Africa.
Yeah.
When you did leave to serve overseas, in your mind, this was this a lifetime commitment for you? Like, this is I'm going to go and do this, and this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah, it was a lifetime commitment. I was going to do that. Yes.
So as you were serving in Pakistan and you couldn't write, there was no email, there was no technology, none of those things. I mean, that must have been a strain on the family in some ways, and that you couldn't connect the way we can now.
Well, we had Blue Air forms that traveled by air.
Yeah.
And it would take a month to come and a month to go. And we always numbered them 1, 2, 3, because you never knew when one would go missing.
Yeah.
In Pakistan, if the mail became too great and they hadn't delivered it all, they'd have a big bonfire out on the square in the front.
Oh, wow.
And so you never knew if your letter got there or not. So we would number them, and Mother would say, well, we didn't get number 3. So I'd say, oh, well, now number 3, I told you, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
And so we kept in touch that way. No phones.
It's too expensive, huh?
Well, we didn't have phones. In Pakistan, you had to go down to the phone office downtown and wait in line, and you got 3 minutes if the connection could be made.
Okay.
And so you didn't waste any time saying, hi, how are you? You'd say, do this, do that, and hang up, and your 3 minutes was over.
Wow. Okay.
So we didn't talk.
Different times for certain.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I remember my own childhood, and that isn't quite as long ago, but phone calls to the US from Brazil were so expensive that it was like once a year or twice a year, call grandparents for their birthday kind of thing.
Right, birthday and Christmas sort of thing, yeah.
That's the way it was.
Can you just talk a little bit about you as a single female doctor showing up in Pakistan, and how did they make sense of that? Did that make sense to them that you weren't with your family, or you weren't with a husband, or how did they process that?
Well, they processed it. I was strange, but I was doing something useful that was helpful, and so it was okay. And the rest of the staff of the hospital, Maybelle, the other doctor, was single, Phyllis, Hannah, and Irish, we were all single women, and they reckoned that we were single for God's sake, which is true.
Okay.
It was for God's sake. So.
Okay.
So they accepted that, and you worked within the limitations of the culture.
Yes, and you never went anywhere alone.
Mm.
You didn't go as a single woman. You didn't go downtown. You would go 3 or 4 together, and it did curtail your independence.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you always wore the national dress. I never wore the burqa, which is the dress of a Muslim woman, because thank God I wasn't. But you'd always have on the shalwar kameez and your head covered with your dupatta, and then a sheet around you. And so you were decent, but you weren't quite their culture quite.
Mm-hmm. They didn't expect everything of a Muslim woman, but they did expect you to be modest by their standards.
Oh yes, you had to be decent. Yes, but not wearing the burqa separated us. We weren't obviously a Muslim woman of their town, but we were decent, and we had white faces, so we were foreigners of some kind, and so
Right.
it was all right. We were accepted, and we went everywhere, and but always in a group.
Always in a group. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. And I know there was a time that your parents were able to visit Pakistan. And so can you talk a little bit about that, and maybe how that kind of helped people make a little bit more sense about, who this woman is, and she actually belongs to somebody.
Yes, well, I had family pictures around in the house, but when my parents arrived, oh my, that created a stir all through town, because Dr. Mary's parents have come, and they were both old. My dad was 81, and I really wondered that he would be traveling around the world at that age.
Mhm.
Mother was in her late 70s, and yet the Lord provided, and it helped to set me in a family, because everything there is family. In fact, when you introduce yourself there, you don't give your name, you tell the family you're a part of.
Mhm.
And then they find out, well, who you are. But so it was very helpful, and they loved to see my family, and my parents quite enjoyed it. They had been there before I arrived, because in 1968, when I left to go to Pakistan, we left together, mom and dad and Esther and I, and we all went to London and saw my cousin who lived there, and we saw all around England. That was fun. And then we stopped to see Ruth and Al in Naples, and that was wonderful. In fact, Esther met her husband at the Rome airport.
Wow.
He was in the military over there, but that's another story. But anyway, then I went to Pakistan, but I flew directly from Karachi up to Pindi and on up to Murray in the mountains. I didn't stop at Shikarpur,
Okay.
which was in the southern desert province. I flew clear up to the north to go to language study. Then my parents and Esther came the next month from Ruth and Al. They went to Karachi. They came to Shikarpur and saw the building that was in progress. And dear Hugh Addleton, his wife and kids were up in Murray for the summer, but he was there. And so his wife would send telegrams about, get this out of that cupboard, and be sure you feed him this, and be sure she had it all organized beautifully. And they were in Shikarpur and saw that, but that was just the outpatient building. Our house wasn't done yet.
Okay.
They saw around, and then they flew up to Pindi, and I welcomed them there, and they were a week with me in Murray, and then they flew on around the world and went home. So they'd seen the place when it was just starting. So to come back then in 1980, they came and saw the place, and all the our house, the nurses' hostel, it was wonderful.
Mhm.
So
And people just loved them.
they'd seen kind of the two phases of the ministry.
Yeah.
And
So
they,
they saw the beginning phase before I did.
yeah, yeah, and they had when you talked about it, they had a mental picture of where you were, and
Yes.
they could put that.
And they had met some of the people that we were there.
Ah,
And when they were visiting me then in 1980, Mother would come with me to the clinic because she could be there when I was talking and treating the women.
yeah,
But Daddy couldn't do that, but he would be visiting everybody else.
okay.
And the Dobie is the washerman and did all the linen for the hospital, washing it by hand
Mm-hmm.
and drying it on our solar. We had a solar dryer in the front lawn.
The front lawn, yes,
And he absolutely loved my father, and he would take Daddy every place. Daddy would need help going up and down the steps. The Dobie was right there to help him, and it was sweet.
No.
And Dorothy, the lady that was our housekeeper, she loved Mama, and she would try to talk to Mother, but Urdu and English just don't mix. So we would translate whenever we were around. But
right.
finally, Dorothy said, "That it's so hard to talk to your mother." She said, "When we get to heaven, we're gonna talk."
Yeah.
So they're both up in heaven now, and I imagine they're just talking up a storm.
Yeah, that's great. So, but I can imagine how having your parents visit you there and seeing where you're going to be right from the beginning, what a gift that was, especially back then.
Yes.
To just have that. You couldn't, FaceTime them, or you couldn't get on Zoom and show them around. So you had that. They knew where you were. They had a context to go with everything you were sharing.
Yeah.
And I think even today, that is hugely valuable to missionaries to have their family understand their context where they're serving.
Exactly. Yes.
Well, on today's podcast, we're wanting to talk about missionaries and aging parents, and we don't need to go into my story right now, but it's kind of my whole life right now, it feels like. But you had opportunity occasionally to visit your folks back in Portland, and but when you clearly had a sense that, your ministry was still in Pakistan. But at some point you did make a decision, hey, it is time that I need to be home. Can you just talk about some of those times you didn't, that you did return, and then finally when you made a decision that you needed to stay back?
Well, of us 5 kids, I realized that I was the one to take care of them when they would need it. Now, of course, they didn't need it in the early years, but I felt that I was the one for a number of reasons that I won't go into right now, but I was the one. And I was in Pakistan, and they were agreeable. They were very much in favor. But when I was home for just a month's vacation in the summer of '76, I realized they're getting older. My dad was in his late 70s, Mother was middle. And I made the decision. Well, and the reason I made the decision, it's all Jim Allen's fault. Jim Allen was our pastor. And at that month, I made it to Montevilla one Sunday. The other Sundays we were out and about, but that one Sunday, and Jim Allen was preaching a series on the 10 Commandments. Now, how legalistic is that? And he was saying that the 10 Commandments were God's rules, God's requirements for how life is best. If you're not stealing, lying, killing.
Yeah.
And so that Sunday he was preaching on honor your parents. And I felt very, very good because I did honor my parents. I had wonderful, godly Christian parents. So I did honor them. And I was sitting there thinking, I hope she is listening, because she isn't treating her parents right. And him, I was looking around judging the people in the church service. And then Jim read that passage from Mark 7, where Christ is having a quiet little talk with those Pharisees. And he says, if a man has that by which his parents would be profited, and he says they can't have it, it's dedicated to God, and you let him give it to the temple, and his parents suffer loss, you are ignoring and subverting the commandment to honor your parents. And that just hit me over the head. If I have my daughterly love and affection and my medical skills and my physical strength, I was strong in those days, and all of that, I said, well, you can't have it, it's dedicated to God in Pakistan, and they suffer loss, which they would have. I would be ignoring and going against the commandment. And that just was God's word to me. So I went and I talked to Jim Allen, and I said, look here, this is what I got out of your sermon on Sunday. And he said, well, yes, I see that. And so he agreed. So I told the mission that when the time came, I would take a leave of absence and stay home and take care of my parents. And I told the field, and there was just silence. Nobody said, oh, yes, or you do what? No, there was no response at all. And I felt kind of unaffirmed. But anyway, that was when I made the decision. And so I told my folks, and they were grateful, but they said, we really don't need that now. And they didn't. They were making it all right. So I went back to Pakistan. Well, in 80, they came out and visited me. And then in 83, I was home here for a short home assignment. And my dad died. And I was here for that. I had asked the Lord that I would be here at the time of death for those two. And I was here for my dad's death. And Mother wasn't going to make it on her own because she was older by now and very frail and arthritic, and she couldn't drive, and she couldn't live in this house alone. And we could have warehoused her in some care center someplace, but that wasn't what the Lord was laying on my heart. So I implemented that, and I told the mission that I was going to go on leave of absence and take care of my mother. Well, in 76, when I decided that and told everybody that I would come when that time came, I was the only doctor in the hospital. And if I had left at that time, they would have had to close down our whole outreach to women in that area. But in 83, then, when I went on leave of absence, actually at the end of 83, there were 4 lady doctors at the hospital. I would have been a superfluous 5th. I mean, it was just as though the Lord was saying, you go do what I called you to do. This work is taken care of.
He provided in the right time.
Yes, exactly. So I stayed home to take care of my mother. I practiced medicine part-time with one of my old classmates. I would sit in his office and see patients while he had to be out doing something else. And I was also a missionary on deputation, going around to all my supporting churches and meeting with them. So I was very busy. And then Don Smith, who was a professor of Intercultural Studies at Western Seminary, he asked me to come and teach. And I said, teach? I went into medicine to avoid teaching. What do you mean? He said, no, he wanted people in the division that actually did mission and didn't just read about it. So I said, well, I've done it for 20 years. Yes, well, so he agreed that he would teach me how to teach. And so he helped me write the syllabuses we have to write each year. And he helped me do the exams and, dear Ann Sandoval, who was professor of Christian ed over there at the time, she said, now, let me tell you, She says that if a student asks a question that you don't know the answer to, you never say, as a professor, you never say, oh, I don't know. You say, oh, that is a wonderful question. Now, if you will find the answer, you look it up and find it and tell us next week, we'll all be blessed. And sure enough, that happened once or twice. And I'd say, thank you, Anne. So I never had to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
But so then Lee got a full-time partner and didn't need my part-time help. And Don Smith wanted me to teach more. I taught the history of mission, my very favorite course. That's the one I started out teaching, and that's the one I ended up teaching.
Okay.
But then he wanted me to do anthropology, and then he wanted me to do other stuff. And so I got full-time at the seminary and wasn't a doctor anymore. I was a teacher. Strange.
Yes. So what was that transition like for you, going from, you had been in this position of being the lead doctor in a hospital with just so many needs, being on call all the time, being needed all the time, and to being, on call for your mom. And it's just a different, there's still very valid needs. There's a huge difference though. What was that like for you?
It was different, but I was so sure that I was where God wanted me. And it was such a privilege to take care of my sweet mama. And it wasn't a problem. And I was busy seeing people, speaking in churches, seeing the patients in the outpatient in the office, that I didn't really suffer. And I kind of muddle along in the middle. I don't have times of deep despair or times of elevated excitement. I kind of go along in the middle. And this was kind of in the middle of this situation. So it wasn't any great upheaval for me. But it was a great privilege.
So it sounds like that certainty, that conviction that you were where God wanted you probably carried you through whatever, because you went through cross-cultural shock. Reverse culture shock is a real thing. I'm sure that happened, even though maybe you didn't feel it as intensely as some. I'm sure that has still happened.
Well, it happened, but it wasn't really extremely important. It was a funny thing. I'd been back and forth so many different times for home assignment, for vacation, for this, that I kind of flip a switch. And when I'm there, I'm there. And when I'm here, I'm here. It didn't really upset me muddling along in the middle as I did. It's fine. This is where I am and this is what I have to do. And I did miss the food.
Yeah.
And I did miss some of the people, but not all of the people. But I didn't really suffer. I didn't suffer the way I think a lot of families do, where the kids are all stressed out and the wife is stressed out and the husband is, it was just me.
Yeah.
And that made my level of distress and coping. It was just me. It wasn't my kids and husband and his family and my family and,
Yeah.
Yeah. So once, when your parents came to Pakistan and they got to meet people that were near and dear to you, and they obviously saw your parents were aging. If you had refused to go home to take care of your parents, what would that have done to the people in Pakistan?
Well, quite frankly, they wouldn't have understood. I had so many women tell me that I came to understand it is a proverb in the language. So many women, when they heard that I was going home to take care of my mother, or I was staying home, they said, Sare dunia me sirf ek hi ami hai, which means in all of this whole world, there is only one mother.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And they were entirely agreeable to the fact that I would stay home and take care of my mother. Yes.
Yeah.
And the times I did go back, I went back every year until 88 when she had surgery.
Okay.
But 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, I would go back for short term to help out for various things. And I'd be there for 2 or 3 months.
Okay.
And then I'd come back. But each time they just, oh, yes, you must take care of your mother.
Hmm.
So there was a real respect for what you were doing.
Oh, yes. And a real respect for age.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So how would you counsel people that are actively serving cross-culturally, and it would seem that there was a need to care for parents? Just talk to them a little bit about wrestling through some of those decisions and what needs to, I know every situation is unique, not.
Yes.
No.
I was going to say that.
Okay.
You can't judge them all from what I did.
No.
No, but I really feel that God directs you, that the Holy Spirit can use, like the Holy Spirit used that sermon from Jim Allen.
Mm-hmm.
I was not thinking about that at all. I was not, I had thought, vaguely how you think about future. Well, I really should do this or that, but it hasn't really grabbed you and affected what you do. And I'd kind of thought, and I'd talked to the siblings about mother's dad and mom. And then when my father died, and it was apparent that my mother wasn't going to make it on her own, then all of this had to flash into, okay, now what do we do?
Mm-hmm.
But the Lord leads. And I think you need to think of all the aspects of, if we put our parents in this kind of home or that kind of care, or hire this person or send them to there, or, everybody's circumstances are different. And you need to think through all those circumstances and see what the Lord impresses on your mind and your heart, and what your siblings think, and what, it's a process.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so important that your parents be cared for in a way and in a place that makes sense to them. Now, I do realize that a lot of parents, especially the older they get, the more inflexible they are. And they say, no, I will not go there, do that, hire the,
Yeah.
That's hard. But I do feel that the Lord can soften their heart and can help them to see. So I think it's got to be a family decision, and you got to pray that the Lord will guide you, will guide your parents, and make them amenable to what has to be done.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't just put them out on the street to live in these homeless camps.
No.
Yeah. I just think as I listen to that, there are so many different variables, and we need to respect that every family. I mean, there are families going out to serve who come from unbelieving families, and their parents maybe never stood with them in their work.
Mm-hmm.
And figuring out how to juggle that and respect their parents and care for them in their old age, maybe a whole nother ministry that they never considered, or just the realities that sometimes mental illness or dementia or things like that can make it really hard to care for aging parents.
Oh, yes, yes.
So we don't know all the factors, but we know that it's a huge issue that many people are wrestling with. So we wanted to make sure to address that today.
Well, everybody wrestles with it if they're paying attention.
Yeah.
Their parents are getting older and they may or may not need help, and you're the first ones to respond, really should be the kids.
That's right.
And some of us don't have any kids, so we have to depend on the Lord.
Mhm.
And your church community, I think, has been really helpful.
Okay.
I think
Yes,
it's
yes.
good to mention that there are people like yourself who don't have kids. How does the church care for those as well?
Well, you do like Montevilla. There's dear Ellen that comes and cleans, and there's my dear niece that goes shopping for me, and dear Carol Wood that drives me around places, and it's a community effort.
Mhm.
Mhm.
But it's what does God expect of me? What can I do to help the older ones in church, my parents and all? And then what can I do as an old lady now? What can I do to help those that are helping me? And it's God's family. And then you reach out to those who don't know him.
Mhm.
And it's life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can imagine the struggle that someone would have of just thinking about leaving the field. And, there's such a compulsion to go to the mission field. And then at some point, several years later, probably have to turn around and consider leaving the mission field. I know there's a heart struggle there about, but God called me here. But at the same time, God will care, God will care for those people in the place where you've been ministering. He will continue to make opportunities for them. But
Oh, really? Without me to
perhaps even.
the work goes on even? Yes, of course. And God leads us different ways in different places.
Mhm.
But God has a place and a service for all of us. And no matter if it changes, or this stops and that begins, or this stops and nothing begins, God is in control. And as David said, our times are in his hands.
Yeah.
And so our ministry changes. We're in a different place. We're in a different, I was a doctor, then I was a teacher.
I appreciate that you took on being a teacher. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Gar. She was a good student,
Yeah. Well, she did 2 degrees.
I know. We were waiting for her to do the 3rd degree, but she never did that.
I tapped out.
Yeah.
Yes. But
Well,
God is in control, and he can use us if we can be up and in this career or that one. Or I think of my dear mother who prayed all around she would have breakfast, and then she would fill the dining table with prayer letters and bulletins and this and that. She prayed around the world.
yeah.
And then she'd have lunch, and then she'd take a nap.
Yeah.
And in the nursing home, we finally had to put her in a nursing home whose chief benefit was a mile away from here. And I would be over there and she'd say, they thought I was asleep, but I was praying. I said, honey, you just keep fooling them. And she was bedfast. She had to be turned every 2 hours and couldn't do anything herself. And she was 96, but she could pray, and she would still pray around the world.
Yeah.
Not sitting at the breakfast table with them all out in front of her, but they'd think she was asleep. She'd be praying. So God can use us however we are.
Right. And I know our family was our family benefited from her prayer times, because I know that she would tell us specifically that she was praying for our family.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I appreciate your thoughts, and just realizing that God is absolutely in control, and that each family has to make the decisions that are appropriate for them as a family. And we just really need to ask God at some point, what is the biggest priority? And if it's the biggest priority is pursuing, the care for our parents that they really need, and they're not going to get it without us, then just trusting God that everything's going to continue on, and He will supply for the needs of the place where we have been in ministry, and He'll supply for our needs as well.
Absolutely.
Well, this is the second time we've had the opportunity to interview Dr. Mary Wilder, and we'll put some notes, some links down below in the notes that would link to her book, Dust and Devotion, and you can read more about her story there. And again, just thank you again for another hour out of your day to make this recording.
Mm-hmm. And thank you for asking me to make it.
Yeah.
Talk to you later, Dr. Mary.
Thank you.
Well, Cara, talk to me about this interview we just wrapped up with Dr. Mary.
Yeah, I think it's just so good to hear another story, another person's experience of taking care of their parents and making that choice to leave the field to care for their parents. I know that my own parents, my dad had to, come to the U.S. a few times to take care of his aging parents. And I think it's just something that a lot of families face.
Yeah.
And it has extra components to it when you're living overseas.
Yeah, there are a lot of issues and concerns. I appreciate Dr. Mary and her saying that every family is unique, and every individual case, you just have to work with it on a family by family basis and do what's going to be best for your family.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that she had just a clear sense of direction from God. It was what she needed to do, and that gave her peace in the midst of that transition. So I would just pray that for any of you who are facing that challenge of what to do, that you would just have God's clear direction.
Yeah, just having that sense of peace and clarity from God about what you need to do to care for your parents. Well, I hope that today's podcast was an encouragement to you. And we'd love to hear from you about if you enjoy listening to the Innkeepers.
Thanks for joining us. See you next time.
Thank you for joining us for the Innkeepers podcast. Our mission at Sanctuary Inn is to equip, refresh, and restore God's global workers. We hope today's podcast was an encouragement to you, or maybe the podcast you heard today, you've been prompted to pass this along to someone you know that could benefit from today's conversation. Creating a podcast is a team effort. Cara and I prepare and do the interviews, and we're grateful for the time that our guests give us out of their busy lives to help us learn more about missionary care.
We want to thank Tim Downing for the music he wrote and performed for the Innkeepers podcast. Tim is a very talented musician, and you can find out more about Tim at downingkeys.com. Our podcast is edited by Javier Bolanos, and our website and show notes are prepared by Micah Githens, my amazing husband. You can visit the Sanctuary Inn website to see more of Micah's great work at sanctuaryinn.org.
Thank you for joining us on our journey to learn more about missionary care.